What if the story you remember was curated? The story that stuck. In 2015, the Owen Labrie case became a national spectacle, but not every journalist followed the script. Newsweek didn't shout, it examined. It noted the uncomfortable gray areas, including the complexity of what actually happened between the two students. At one point, the reporting underscores how the legal outcome didn't match the public narrative. That Labrie was acquitted of most serious sexual assault charges, even as the media portrayal suggested something far more definitive. Now, that tension between verdict and narrative is where this story begins to crack open. Raise the nuance. Now, here's something you don't usually hear. The same Newsweek article, measured, fact-driven, became the target of a petition to have it removed. Not corrected, removed. The campaign launched through Serve Justice framed the article as harmful simply because it didn't align with the dominant narrative. Now, think about that. A piece of journalism targeted for being too balanced? Now, the legal analyst, Scott Greenfield, writing at Simple Justice, saw exactly what was happening. And he wrote, and I quote, "Owen Labrie will not go down quietly, nor should he. And more importantly, there is no justice in a system where the outcome is dictated by the public outrage, rather than proof beyond a reasonable doubt." That's not a defense of a person. That's a defense of a principle. Now let's talk about the opportunity. Now let's turn to a revealing moment. During the trial, Amanda Grady Sexton spoke to the Concord Monitor, and she called the case an opportunity. Not a tragedy, not a legal proceeding, an opportunity. The word matters because behind the scenes there were pre-trial press communications, coordinated messaging, strategic engagement with media outlets, and later when the media coverage was criticized as excessive. No one stepped forward to say, "We helped shape this." Let's talk about the reversal. Now, watch the pivot. In a later case, speaking to the union leader, Amanda Grady Sexton takes a very different tone. Suddenly, the concern is media influence on trials. The same force that was once described as an opportunity is now something to be wary of. It's a remarkable shift from architect to observer. Now, after the verdict, the Labrie case didn't just end, it triggered a chain reaction. Attorney Steve Kelly led lawsuits against St. Paul's, then came Dartmouth, and the result? A Cy Press Award, distributing millions, 500,000 to WISE, W-I-S-E, nearly 4.9 million to the attorneys involved. When attention rises, litigation follows, and when litigation succeeds, the financial incentives become impossible to ignore. Let's follow the money. So the New Hampshire Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence reported over $12.7 million in revenue. A powerful organization. But internal questions raise a quiet contradiction. Why do official filings show little lobbying activity when the organization is deeply engaged in legislative work? That's not speculation, that's documented. The national layer. Now let's zoom out for a second. Marcy's Law, funded by billionaire Henry T. Nicholas, a man whose life has drawn headlines of his own. According to reporting, police found heroin, cocaine, meth, and ecstasy in his hotel suite, and yet he bankrolls a national movement to reshape victims' rights laws. Critics are blunt. The National Association of Defense Lawyers states Marcy's Law undermines the foundation of our criminal legal system. And yet, more directly, it appends the notion of innocent unless proven guilty. Connecting the threats for a sec. Now, media narratives, advocacy campaigns, legal action, financial outcomes, all orbiting the same events. And when a dissenting article appears, it's not debated, it's targeted. Here's the quiet truth. Narratives just don't win because they're right. They win because they're reinforced, protected, funded, and once they take hold, even fairness becomes a threat. The computer felony trap. Let's talk about something that should terrify every parent, every teenager, and frankly, anyone with an iPhone in New Hampshire, because buried inside our laws is a trap. Now, it's not for predators. It's not for kids. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Back in 2015, Amanda Grady Sexton, wearing two hats at once, city councilor and policy director for NHCA-DSV, publicly defended the use of New Hampshire's computer felony law in the Owen Labrie case. She didn't just defend it, she bulldozed the narrative. She argued the law was working exactly as intended, that lawmakers knew what they were doing, and that using a computer to solicit a minor for sex should absolutely be a felony. Strong words, clean, simple, convincing. But here's what never gets said out loud. The same law, it doesn't just apply to predators, it applies to teenagers. Let me spell this out clearly. Under New Hampshire law, a teenager can commit a felony. Now, not by committing assault, not by forcing anything, not by doing something as simple as texting, messaging using Snapchat, trying to set up a date, even when the relationship itself might fall under Romeo and Juliet protections. So you've got this contradiction. On one hand, you say, these are kids, these are relationships, these are gray areas. On the other hand, we say, if you used a phone, that's a felony. Now, here's the part that should make your stomach turn a little. The organizations pushing hardest on these laws, the Department of Justice, New Hampshire Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence, all the compliance officers, task forces, advisory boards, they never go to schools and say, hey, by the way, your kid could become a felon by sending the wrong text. No. No curriculum, no warning, no public awareness campaign, no big push to educate teenagers on how dangerously broad this law really is. But they will show up after the fact, when it's too late, when a kid's life is already cracked, wide open. And this is where I have a real problem, because you cannot stand at the podium as both a policymaker and an advocate, defending a law this aggressive, and then stay completely silent about how easily it can be misapplied. That's not public safety. That's selective enforcement waiting to happen. And let's be honest about what was happening in that original argument. Amanda Grady Sexton framed the Labrie case as predatory behavior, not teenage behavior. She made it clear this wasn't about setting up a date. This was coercion, manipulation, pressure. And if that's the standard, fine. Then say that. Fine. But don't leave the door wide open for that same law to quietly sweep up kids who are doing what teenagers have always done, just now with a phone in their hand. Because here's the truth. Nobody wants to say this out loud. Technology didn't create teenager behavior. It just documented it. So the law is going to treat a text message like a felony weapon. Then where is the education? Where is the warning? Where is the accountability for the people who pushed this law forward and never explained the risk? You don't get to build that trap and then act surprised when kids fall into it. Act 8. The serve justice layer. Now let's talk about a name that quietly sits at the center of this ecosystem. Laura Dunn, founder of Serve Justice. In media coverage, she was often described as a personal representative for the victim's family. But that description leaves out something critical, because Laura Dunn was not just a sympathetic presence orbiting the case. According to the record and supporting notes, she and Serve Justice were directly involved in training Concord police, training Merrimack County prosecutors, training in coordination with the New Hampshire Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. And that matters because there is a fundamental difference between being presented to the public as a family representative and operating as a professional trainer with influence inside the very system handling the case. Those are not interchangeable roles, not even close. And yet that distinction was not clearly communicated to the public, which raises a fair question. Was the public seeing the full structure or just the most sympathetic version of it? The notes also reference a $6,000 executive council grant tied to training at UNH. Again, not random. Training, messaging, institutional alignment. Same current, different surface. And there's another layer here that can't be ignored. Laura Dunn, large-scale lawsuits, major financial exposure, and ultimately significant settlements. So now you have to ask, where does advocacy end and where does legal strategy begin? Because when the same network touches media training, prosecution environments, and then connects directly to civil litigation, you are no longer looking at isolated roles. Thank you for listening, and please like and subscribe my podcast. And also be an agent of chaos. Verify your sources. News is not to be trusted. If you don't believe me, that's fine. You could just Google, take a look, but just be wary.